Night fell like a hammer, heavy and absolute, pressing darkness over the land until even the stars seemed afraid to shine. Somewhere far off, artillery rolled in the distance, shaking the broken woods and cratered fields. There was nothing gentle about this night. In a battered farmhouse at the edge of a ruined village, the last flickers of candlelight threw shadows across tired, grimy faces. Men crouched against the walls, backs aching, hands clinging to rifles, eyes fixed on the windows and jagged holes torn by gunfire. Beyond those shattered walls, the enemy waited, silent, patient, relentless. Inside, the silence was thick, suffocating. The men could feel it pressing in, the quiet of those who know they are hunted and that dawn may never come. This wasn't the first time Americans found themselves surrounded, cut off, and facing the impossible. From the forests of the Ardennes to the frozen hills of Korea, from nameless islands in the Pacific to the tangled jungles of Vietnam, the story had played out before. When all hope seemed lost, something inside refused to yield. Now, on this blood-stained ground, a new chapter was unfolding, one written not with grand speeches, but with grit, brotherhood, and the stubborn will to stand. The world beyond the farmhouse was a prison. Roads had been bombed into oblivion, pounded into mud and wire and bone. The river, once a lifeline, now flowed with debris and watched by enemy snipers. The radio spat only static and broken orders, no promise of relief, only reminders that they were on their own. Food had vanished days before, water was hope rationed by the drop. A few men made dark jokes about the coffee they'd have at home, or the hot meals waiting for them in some far-off kitchen. Most kept silent, saving breath for what was coming. These men did not see themselves as heroes. They were farmers' sons, steelworkers, teachers, mechanics. Some had joined for adventure, others to escape. Yet here, huddled together, what bound them wasn't training or patriotism, but the stubborn will to survive and the refusal to let down the man next to them. Captain Michael Sullivan, broad-shouldered and steady-eyed, moved among them with a battered helmet and a voice that never wavered. He was from Missouri, a man shaped by hard land and harder times, and he led with the authority of someone who had weathered storms and knew they must be faced head-on. Sullivan counted the odds. He checked ammunition, marked positions on a map that was little more than rags, sent his last runner, Billy, a kid from Indiana who promised to return. He hadn't. Around Sullivan, the men tried to sleep. None could. Their minds were haunted by the ghosts of home, laughter, quiet nights, memories that felt like dreams now. Yet something else took root, a fierce determination not to break, not to yield to the darkness. As hours crawled by, sounds outside grew sharper. The enemy was closing in, shadows darting through the tree line, the glint of steel in moonlight, the low growl of foreign voices. Sullivan called his men close. "Listen up," he said. "We hold this ground. For each other. For every man who didn't make it. They expect us to break. We don't give them that." Nods went around the room, thin but unbroken. Rifles were checked, canteens passed, hands clasped in silent agreement. The battered farmhouse became a fortress, of will, not stone. The first attack came before midnight, a flare arching over the yard, painting everything in blue-white fire. Machine guns rattled, shattering the stillness. Bullets tore through windows and men dove for cover. The Americans answered back, rifles cracking, machine guns coughing through the darkness. Shouts and screams echoed, wounded dragged to cover, hands pressed to wounds. Every second was a lifetime, every heartbeat another chance at survival. Smoke burned their lungs, sweat and fear soaked their uniforms. Outside, the enemy surged, shadowed and relentless. The Americans held, fighting from windows, doorways, piles of rubble. Sullivan moved among them, shouting orders, hauling ammo, firing until his rifle was hot. "Hold the line," he roared, voice hoarse. And they did. For hours the assault raged. The farmhouse shook with every explosion, men praying, screaming, refusing to fall. At dawn, the field was littered with bodies. The air hung heavy with the stench of blood and gunpowder. Inside, the Americans counted their dead. Empty cots, folded blankets, blank stares. Sullivan tended the wounded, offered words he barely believed. He stared out at the ruined land and knew the enemy would come again. Day crawled by. The sun gave little warmth. Water was gone, ammunition nearly spent. Men looked to Sullivan, searching for answers he didn't have. He told stories, of home, ball games, summer nights. Anything to keep hope alive. One man began to hum a song, the others joined, rough voices rising, a defiant answer to the enemy. As the sun set, the second attack began. Mortars pounded, machine guns tore the air. The farmhouse trembled. The Americans traded what few bullets remained, counting every shot. When the enemy burst through the back, they fought with bayonets and fists. The air filled with screams, dust, splintering wood. In the chaos, Sullivan saw men fall, courage in their eyes, refusing to give ground. For every step the enemy gained, they paid dearly. Night fell, the battle slowed. The enemy retreated, regrouping. Inside, Sullivan took stock. Only a handful left, battered, bleeding, faces streaked with dirt and tears. He radioed one last message: "This is Captain Sullivan. We are surrounded. Supplies gone. We will hold as long as we can. If this is the end, tell our families we fought together. We never gave in." The men prepared for the final assault. They shared what little they had: bread, water, memories. "If this is it," someone whispered, "let's make it count." They waited, hearts pounding. Dawn came slow. The enemy attacked again, pouring fire into the ruins. The last Americans stood together, shoulder to shoulder, answering bullet for bullet. Sullivan fought at the front, refusing to yield. When his rifle jammed, he drew his pistol, then his knife, then his hands. The end came suddenly. The enemy broke through, filling the farmhouse with gunfire. For every American who fell, another stood. When the last shot was fired, the enemy found not broken men, but silent heroes, hands curled around empty rifles, eyes open. The world moved on. Maps shifted, battles raged elsewhere, headlines changed. But the memory of that stand would not fade. It became legend, a story told in whispers, a lesson in courage and sacrifice. Years later, a monument rose on that field. Old men returned, tracing names on stone. Children asked, "What happened here?" And the answer was always the same: they were surrounded. Outnumbered. Running out of time. But they stood. And they held the line. The American spirit, tested by fire, forged in loss, stronger for each victory and defeat. When darkness seems total, some choose to stand. In that stand, they find something greater, a legacy that endures, a freedom that lives on. So long as courage remains, the story will never end. Under the heavy silence of dawn, the survivors crouched in the ashes of their stronghold. The farmhouse, once refuge and fortress, was now barely more than a skeleton of scorched beams and shattered brick. Every inch was marked by struggle, bullet holes in the walls, blood stains on the floor, the spent shells scattered like seeds of loss. The men who remained, battered but alive, held their rifles in each other as if both were the last anchor to the world they once knew. Private Eddie Jenkins, the quiet boy from Georgia, crawled across the broken floor to tend the wounded, whispering encouragement through lips cracked with thirst. His friend, Corporal Miguel Ramirez, clung to life, a shrapnel wound burning in his side. Jenkins would not leave him. "You're gonna make it, Miggy," he whispered, his voice fierce with hope. Across the room, Sergeant Paul Harrigan, the hard-edged Chicago cop, counted bullets and scanned the fields for movement, fury and fatigue warring behind his eyes. Sullivan checked on each man, his words gentle, hands steady despite the ache in his bones. The radio crackled to life, just once, a voice nearly lost in the storm of static. "Hold position. Reinforcements delayed. Do not surrender." Sullivan closed his eyes, fighting the despair that threatened to choke him. Still, he repeated the words. "They haven't forgotten us. Hold on." Throughout the day, the enemy circled, tending their wounded, fortifying their lines. The Americans moved like ghosts, reinforcing barricades, sharing stories of home, a harmonica tune drifting through the ruined walls. Every small comfort became a shield against fear, the taste of a dry biscuit, the memory of a mother's voice, the warmth of a letter pressed to the chest. Night brought its own torments. The men took turns on watch, every shadow outside a threat. Sullivan recalled fields of golden wheat back home, Harrigan spoke of snowy nights in Chicago, Jenkins told of the girl who wrote him every week. Memories became lifelines, binding them to hope as the world closed in. At midnight, engines rumbled in the far distance, the faint promise of American tanks somewhere beyond the reach of enemy lines. Ramirez, feverish but alert, squeezed Jenkins's hand. "We're not alone." The sound fanned embers of hope among the exhausted men. Yet dawn brought only renewed siege. Snipers harassed every exposed window. Water was gone, bandages were torn from shirts. Harrigan cracked jokes about Chicago diners, his humor a thread holding spirits together. Then, without warning, a white flag appeared at the tree line. The enemy shouted offers of surrender, safe passage, food, medical care. For a moment, the men looked to Sullivan. Some considered. They were starving, wounded, hearts full of longing for home. Sullivan let his men speak. Then, his voice soft but unbreakable, "We didn't come this far to surrender now. If we give in, every sacrifice is lost. The world will know we did not yield." The enemy's patience snapped. Mortar shells crashed in relentless rhythm, blowing open the walls, flames licking the rafters, smoke choking the living. The defenders fought for every inch. Jenkins and Ramirez held the rear, shoulders pressed together. Harrigan's machine gun stuttered until it jammed, then he fired his pistol, then swung with his fists. Sullivan ran from post to post, rallying the men, dragging wounded to safety. The breach came from the north. In the roaring smoke, bayonets flashed, fists flew, men screamed. Jenkins felt the world spinning, Ramirez's grip anchoring him. For a moment, everything dissolved into instinct, survival measured in breath and blood. With a desperate roar, Harrigan drove the enemy back, and the survivors slumped behind cover, hands and faces slick with sweat and tears. For hours, the attack ebbed and surged, neither side claiming victory. When at last the sun set, the world was silent but for the ragged breathing of the men who still lived. The farmhouse was nearly gone, but the spirit within had not broken. As darkness returned, Sullivan forced himself to stand. He raised the battered flag, ragged and burned, and jammed it upright in the rubble. "We're not finished," he whispered. "Not while one of us draws breath." The enemy paused, uncertain. For all their firepower and numbers, they could not extinguish the flame burning in the hearts of these men. And so the story continued, the line unbroken. Reinforcements were still far, the final act unwritten. But in the ruins, among the wounded and the dying, hope and defiance stood taller than any wall left standing. They spoke little, each man lost in memory or silent prayer, clinging to the idea that if they held just a little longer, rescue might come. Captain Sullivan checked every post, though exhaustion made his steps heavy and the wound at his side throbbed. He counted bullets, so few left. Sometimes he thought he could hear American engines on the horizon, but he knew better than to promise his men salvation. Private Jenkins shivered in a corner with Ramirez, fighting to keep his friend conscious. "You remember," Ramirez murmured, "when you said we'd be home by Christmas?" Jenkins smiled, weak but honest. "I lied. I just wanted you beside me." Somehow, in the darkest hour, they laughed, a tiny, precious light against the black. Outside, the enemy pressed ever closer, searching for any weakness. Small arms fire crackled, a cruel reminder that the siege had not lifted. But then, a change, gunfire not directed at them, but somewhere further out. A runner stumbled into the ruins, one of their own lost days before. "They're coming," he gasped, collapsing. "Americans. Breaking through. Just hold on." The men felt a surge of hope. Harrigan grinned through blood and exhaustion. Jenkins squeezed Ramirez's hand. Even Sullivan, who'd hidden his heart behind steel, allowed himself a brief flicker of relief. They patched barricades, cleaned weapons, found strength they did not know they had. The knowledge that they were not forgotten, this was their final ration, enough to steel them for what was coming. The enemy, realizing time was running short, launched a brutal new assault. Mortars fell, flames leapt along the beams, smoke filled every corner. The men fought like wolves, every shot precious, every heartbeat a gift. Jenkins and Ramirez fired from the same shattered window, hearts beating as one. Harrigan, barely standing, directed the last of their fire. Sullivan, a solitary figure at the barricade, emptied his rifle and fought on with fists. The world shrank to fire, screams, and pain. No one thought of surrender. Each man drew on a well of courage that ran deeper than fear. Jenkins remembered his father's words about what it meant to stand for something. Harrigan fought to save even one more friend. Sullivan, burdened with command, felt the weight lift as his men stood with him. Then, in the darkness, the growl of American tanks and the crackle of friendly gunfire from the tree line. The enemy wavered, scattered. Reinforcements at last. The siege was broken. Relief swept the defenders. Medics rushed in, carrying out the wounded and the dead. Jenkins, barely standing, helped Ramirez into the dawn. Harrigan leaned on a medic, smiling despite the pain. Sullivan, eyes shining with exhaustion and pride, saluted the new arrivals. The battle was over. The price was plain, bodies in the yard, a farmhouse now only memory and ashes, but the stand was not forgotten. News spread, first among the men, then across the nation, of the ones who held out, surrounded, outnumbered, running out of time, but unbroken. The ruined farmhouse became a landmark, a place of remembrance, a lesson for all who came after. Years passed. Jenkins returned home, but the war walked with him. He wrote, as he had dreamed, His words forever shaped by the stand in the farmhouse. Ramirez, scarred but alive, became a voice for those who could not speak. Harrigan, older, wiser, found purpose in helping others. Sullivan returned to his land, tending fields as he once tended men. Each year, on the anniversary, the survivors gathered at the rebuilt farmhouse, laying flowers, telling stories, standing in silence. The flag they defended, now whole, now honored, was raised once more, a symbol of everything they sacrificed. As the sun set, Sullivan spoke. We were ordinary men in an extraordinary time. We stood together. Let this stand be a reminder: freedom is never free. It must be won by those willing to pay the price. The words carried on the wind, a promise for all who would listen. The story did not end. In every quiet act of courage, in every moment someone stands for what is right, the line held in that farmhouse lives on. Decades have passed. The land that once shook beneath artillery and desperation now rests in quiet dignity. Where smoke and fire once ruled, grass grows tall, bending gently beneath open skies. The farmhouse still stands, rebuilt stone by stone, its walls strong again but forever marked by memory. To the untrained eye, it is a peaceful place. To those who know the story, it is sacred ground. Each year, people arrive from every corner of the country. Veterans in worn jackets heavy with medals. Families holding photographs and folded flags. Students stepping quietly, sensing that this is not just history, but something alive. They walk the same ground where ordinary men once made an extraordinary choice. They stand where fear was met with resolve, where surrender was offered and refused. A granddaughter of one of the defenders stands before the memorial, her fingers tracing a familiar name carved into cold stone. She never met him. Yet she knows him well, through letters written by candlelight, through words shaped by hunger, fear, and hope. His voice lives in those pages. His courage lives here. Nearby, a teacher tells a group of students the story of the stand, not as a tale of glory, but of character. They didn't fight because they wanted to die, he says. They fought because they wanted others to live free. The flag is raised once more. Its colors catch the light, bright against the sky. Silence falls as names are read aloud, each one echoing into the present. Young voices listen. Old hands salute. Somewhere in the crowd, a soldier in modern uniform stands at attention, knowing that the oath she carries is bound to moments like this. Later, as the ceremony fades and people drift away, the farmhouse stands alone again. Wind moves through the grass. Birds settle where gunfire once ruled. The place feels peaceful, but not empty. It is full, of memory, of meaning. The moral of the stand is not locked in the past. It reaches forward. It speaks quietly but firmly: freedom is not inherited without cost. It survives only because ordinary people, in moments of unbearable pressure, choose responsibility over comfort, courage over fear, unity over self-preservation. The men who held that line did not know they would be remembered. They did not fight for monuments or ceremonies. They fought for each other. For the man beside them. For the belief that some lines must be held, even when holding them demands everything. That lesson still matters. In every generation, there are moments when the easy path whispers surrender. When standing firm feels too heavy. The story of the farmhouse answers those moments. It reminds us that strength is not found in numbers, but in resolve. That time may run out, odds may overwhelm, but character endures. So long as that truth is remembered, the stand is not over. It lives in every quiet act of courage. In every choice to do what is right when no one is watching. In every person who refuses to yield when yielding would be easier. Surrounded. Outnumbered. Running out of time. They stood. And because they stood, the line still holds.